Hey guys, I wanted to do a quick video on overloading because I don't think I've ever done a video or really done anything about overloading, and it's probably one of the most important parts of the game when you get into high level PvP or PvP in general. When you're out doing PvE or care bearing, you're most likely not going to need to overload your guns, because if you are, you're damaging your guns, and it's not worth damaging on them and then having to repair them to get the small amount of increase. The reason it's so important to overload in PvP is because you need every single little edge you can get to try to make you more likely to win. It's all about probabilities, and if you overload, your probability of winning the fight goes up. If you have, you know, like I run with the 3%, let's see, 3% implant for, go to the belt here, 3% implant for small hybrid turrets. That gives me 3% more damage. I've got level 5 on all the gun skills, and level 5 on the specialization for the guns and all that stuff to try to get the damage as high as I can. Also, every little thing you do gives you a bigger edge in PvP, and overloading is a pretty huge edge. If we look at our weapons here, for my weapons, you can see, where does it say it? Overload damage bonus 15%. Now if that was a railgun, the long range guns are typically duration, so they fire faster when you overload. Like artillery or railguns, those will fire faster when overloaded. High damage short range weapons do more damage when you overload them. So basically, if I overload my guns, I can instantly increase my damage output by, let's make sure I don't die here, by 15%, and that's huge. I mean, if some people will go pay, you know, 20 million ISK to get the 3% damage mod for turrets, damage implant, you know, and if you can get 15% just by overloading, that's pretty big too. That's why I have thermodynamics to 5, and I recommend everybody get that to 4 as soon as possible. 5's not really critical. It's nice, but get it to 4 as fast as possible, thermodynamics, because what thermodynamics does is it decreases the amount of damage you're going to take when you're overloading your guns. Now, you see here it says heat damage. That's the amount of damage my guns take from the heat. And what I'm going to show you here in a second, I'm jammed right now, but I'm going to show you here in a second how that works, how the heat works. But before we do that, I just want to show you a couple different spots on the thing here and show you how it works. So, when you overload stuff, it typically does better in one attribute or another. For guns, it's damage or duration. Basically, damage output is the net effect. You'll do more damage when you overload your guns. If you overload a point, like a warp disruptor or a warp scrambler, you get a range bonus. You see 8,625. I'm going to prime it to be overload. I think I got to refresh it here. Before it was 8,600, and now 10.35, so 10,350. So it's a 20% range bonus to my point. That can be a big help in certain situations, especially with the longer points. With afterburners and microwarpdrives, it's speed. See, my microwarpdrive 600. Overload it, and it'll go to like 750 or something, or 700. Oh, 900. Nice. You can see, yeah, see 50% overload speed bonus. So you get a big bonus to your microwarpdrive. The problem is with all these things, and especially with the microwarpdrive, it's really bad about heat. You're going to take damage as you do these things. So let me start coming back in. Now, how do you overload? You can click this top little green sliver here, and that primes it to be overload. Or if you already have your module active and you say hit that, then on its next cycle around, it'll start its overload. And now let's watch what happens when it overloads. I want you to watch. Here's my heat meter. It's my heat status. The one on the left's for low, the one on the middle is for middle slots, and the one on the right's for high slots. And you see the middle one, because that's a middle slot module, the microwarpdrive. You see it going up, and let me turn it off here. You see my speed's like 5K a second. That's considerably faster than I usually would go without it. And also, have a look here. You see this damage? See that red that's showing up? That's damage. If I hold my mouse over the module, you'll see in that little black box there, 36% damaged. You'll see here, 36% damaged. Now, if I had nanite repair paste, which I usually carry, and I for some reason don't have right now, I could right click and then click repair, and that would repair the module. You see I don't have any not repair paste, so it won't work. But what that does is it'll repair the module basically while I'm in space. I don't have to dock to repair the module. It takes time. You can train the skills to make it faster and more efficient, so it uses less nanite paste. And I'd highly recommend you train those skills to level 3 or level 4, because it helps, especially in 0-0 where you can't dock, to be able to repair some after a fight. It only repairs modules, though. You can't repair like armor or hull damage with nanite repair paste. Also, you see the damage there. If I was to let it go, you see the heat was going up. That heat will continue to rise until it hits 100%. And basically, the hotter the module is, the faster it's going to start taking damage. So, if you overload just a little bit here and there, you can probably manage to take less damage. But for the most part, it's hard to manage your heat, other than the fact to know if your heat's already maxed out and you want to overload again, it's probably not the best idea, because you're going to start taking damage almost instantly. Whereas if, say, my high slots have no heat right now, it would take them a couple cycles through the guns before they got warm enough to even start taking any heat damage. So there's two things you monitor when you're overloading: your heat status here and your gun's damage. You got to be very careful about the damage. If the damage gets to 100%, then your modules will deactivate and stop working. And then nanite repair paste will not fix a completely damaged module. You have to go to a station and repair it, and then go back into your fitting screen and online it. One trick to overloading is that you need to space your guns out. You see the Tyrannus has 3 turret high slots and 1 just random high slot for whatever. If you leave a slot empty in between, you see how I didn't put all these turrets together and then leave an open high slot on the end? Ideally, you want to leave your empty slot in the middle somewhere. That way it acts as a heat sink, so the heat doesn't cross over from one slot to the next. It's easier to see how this works more visually when you look at it in EFT. But you'll see that if you overload your modules in EFT and move them around, you can kind of optimize them by spacing them like this. And that's because there's the heat from one module leaks into the next module beside it. And if you have a module on the outside, it leaks into the outside space, I suppose. And if you have an empty slot beside it, it leaks into the empty slot and nothing happens. There is a theory, and I still haven't got a confirmed answer on this. It doesn't seem to me to be worthwhile, but a lot of people say you should offline a module, like a salvager or something, in that slot right there in between them. I don't think that makes any difference whatsoever between doing that and having an empty high slot. I think it's the same effect from everything I've seen. It's the same effect as having an offline module or nothing in that spot. But nonetheless, by having that one space there in between my modules instead of having it on the outside, that'll increase my amount of time, total time that I can overload, by anywhere from 15 to 20, 25 seconds. So just by spacing my modules like that, I'm going to get a longer amount of time I can overload. And the longer I can overload in a fight, the more damage I can put onto the target over the course of the fight, and the more likely I am to win the fight. So let's see how far out I've gotten here. I'm 166 out. Alright, watch this. I can warp in. Let's stop that. Another way, I think, you can click the tops of these things to overload. You can also click this, overload rack. That'll overload your whole top rack, overload your whole mid rack, all your mid slots, and overload your whole bottom rack. I don't have anything that overloads in the bottom rack, but you can overload armor reps, shield reps. Most modules can be overloaded. Damage control cannot be. So that's how you do a whole rack, is that button there. And if you wanted to say, this is a new change they just added, you can now hold shift and click the module, and that'll prime it. Had the module been running already and I did shift click, then that would overload it on the next cycle that came around. So let's try this out. I'm going to warp to the belt at 0 here. I'm going to load. I got antimatter already loaded. That's good. And I'm going to go in. Hopefully I'm not going to be permajam for this entire time, but let's see what happens here. Okay, let's pick out one of these rats. Which one was jamming me? I think it was this guy. I don't know. Whatever. Turn on my afterburner. Lock. Oh, I forgot to get drones. Oh well. I'm going to start shooting. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to overload. I'm going to hold shift. Click. You see it starts to turn green. Oh, I blew him up before I could do it. Okay, let's try that again. Alright, on this guy, I'm going to prime it first. Click, and now watch the heat meter. Okay, well this is... I'm doing too much damage to actually show you what I'm doing. I gotta go chase this guy, hold on. But the key, what's so important about overloading in EVE Online is that it's just one part of the game that makes the combat dynamic. And I'm probably not using the right word for that, but you know, in some of the old MMOs and role-playing games, combat was basically approach your enemy, click on him, and click attack, and then you would stand there and you'd like beat each other until one of you died. And it was just a question of a math equation between hit points and damage output, and that's all it was. And you know, without overload, EVE Online is kind of like that. You know, you approach your enemy, you turn on your guns, and it's hit points and damage output, and whoever wins. There's, you know, kiting and range variables, and you can team up on somebody and that kind of thing, which changes it as well. But one of the dynamic features is that you can overload, so you can actually kind of have a direct input in the fight as the fight's happening. I'll overload that to change the outcome, so every fight's not decided before it happens. It gives you a more dynamic fighting style, I guess, and that's what I believe CCP wanted. You see I'm dropping him really fast because I'm doing a lot of DPS with the overload thing. You see the heat here. Heat 33%, guns 7%. Now something important to notice, you noticed before when I did the Microwarpdrive, it overheated really, really fast, and I started taking damage really, really fast. Look at this. Heat damage 14.25 hit points. That's a pretty high number. If you look up here, hit points. Each module actually has hit points, so it's taking damage just like you would in a hit points fashion. You know, the hit points are taking damage, and there you can see that it's got a total of 76 hit points. Yeah, 76 hit points. And 14.25 is the damage it takes when it's being overheated. You look at the guns, and they have 40 hit points, so not quite as many hit points, I don't think. Anyway, then you look at the overload, it's 0.6. So you can tell that the guns overheat much better than the Microwarpdrive, and that's something you'll notice when you actually get out there and start doing it. Once you're actually out and you're blowing stuff up and you're fighting and using your overload in combat, what you're going to notice is that guns overload pretty well. You can overload guns oftentimes, like this Tyrannus, with the way I have it set up and with my skills, I can overload between 2 and 3 minutes. Somewhere in there, for 2 to 3 minutes I can overload, and that's non-stop overloading my guns. My Microwarpdrive, on the other hand, is 30 seconds a minute. You see the big difference there. The more modules you have overloading at the same time, the more heat. So if I was to just take one gun and spread it out away from the rest, I could probably overload one gun of the entire rack for like 5 minutes. So as they compound on each other and take more heat damage, the more you have in a rack. Like if I was overloading my point and my Microwarpdrive, then they would take damage faster because there are two things producing heat on that same rack. And heat does not bleed from one rack to another rack. It always stays on the same rack. So it doesn't matter what the high rack's doing, it will not affect the medium rack. And it's a lot of stuff. I never even thought that there was so much to overloading until just, you know, I started making this video, and I'm kind of shocked at how many little details there are to overloading that I just take for granted. Another tip. A lot of people say, when they first start learning how to overload and they get the skill, and it used to be like a pro skill where you had to train for like a month or two to get the skill, and now it's really easy to get, and almost anybody can get it with like a couple days of training. It's really easy. But most people say, okay, I'm going to wait and save my overload for when I'm in trouble. And they say, I'm just only going to use it when things go bad. And that's what most people's mindset is for overloading. It's the completely wrong mindset. It's the completely wrong. It's like going into a boxing ring and saying, I'm not going to hit the other guy hard until he starts hitting me hard enough to hurt me. It's really, really bad mindset to go in and say, I'm going to play nice and not hit this guy hard and not do my worst unless I'm in trouble and things start to go bad. It just doesn't make sense, because by the time things start to go bad, it's going to be too late for you to have any effect on the fight. Therefore, always overload at the beginnings of the fight. Even on fights that you're pretty sure you've got locked down, always overload at the very beginning of the fight. And that's huge. That's one of the biggest tips I can give you in PvP in this game. Whether you're in a fleet, whether you're in solo, always overload at the beginning of the fight. That's when I lead fleets. That's one of the main things I try to push is I want people to go in, and no matter if we've got 10 versus 2, it doesn't matter. Always go in and drop the enemy as fast as you can. Don't sit around. Don't try to prolong it, because you never know what's coming. You never know when someone's going to hot drop you. You never know when there's another blob coming. You never know. So always do your worst from the beginning. Always, make your first punch your hardest punch, is another way I've said it. But overload, and what I'll do is in a frigate, because frigates overload so well, almost all frigate fights you will have will end before your guns burn out if you have your thermodynamics at 3 or 4, certainly at 5. So what I'll do when I'm in a anti-interceptor ship like the Tyrannus is, unless I'm taking on a cruiser or something big that's going to take me 5 minutes to kill, I'll typically go into the fight, and from before the fight even starts, I'll be primed to overload, and then I'll overload the entire fight, and I won't even look at my heat for the entire fight. I'll focus on other stuff, because I know that the overload is going to be okay for 2 to 3 minutes while I pay attention and focus on the fight. So that's huge. Make sure you focus in, and make sure you know what your damage is and all that. Like if you're in a Thrasher, they've got so many guns up in the high slot, your guns are not going to last long, like 30 seconds a minute, in something where you got a full rack of guns like that are putting off heat. So it takes practice. It takes getting used to. My recommendation is, before you ever use it in PvP, go out and burn some modules out and practice on rats. See what it's like. Take them all the way. Burn them all the way out. From start to finish, just take it and run them into the ground. I'll do that with my Microwarpdrive right now. But run it into the ground and see how long it is, see how it takes, see how it looks, see what the warning signs are before it goes bad. It can be a little bit tricky at times. There's some random variables in there to make it so that it's not 100% predictable. But get out there, try it out, and get used to it, because it's going to make you a better PvPer once you get to where you can overload and manage your overloading confidently, to get the most out of your ship that you possibly can. And before we end this video, I'll let you watch. And there goes my Microwarpdrive. Can't turn it on. It's dead. I've got a dock to repair it. So that's it for the overload video. I hope you learned a couple things from it. And that's it. If you like that, you're going to love my free PvP video series. Just click the link below this video and it'll take you to that free video series where you can learn a lot of really cool stuff like this, and some stuff that's even cooler than what you just learned in this video.